Hello friends, it is time for round 2 of our Leica Q2 versus Fujifilm X100V comparison project. Raymond and I shared round 1 a couple weeks ago, and I'll link to that video in the description, but we took the cameras to the museum. Raymond used the Q2 in that video and I used the X100V. And now for round 2, we did things a little bit differently. We first did a couple of time lapses together where we kind of both set up both cameras, and then I took out both cameras for a couple of outings of my own. So in this video, I will share some of those photos as well as my experience with the cameras, and Raymond will also jump in to discuss a little bit about his thoughts on the X100V for nature and landscapes. Remember, today is not the final comparison of the X100V to the Q2. That's coming in the next episode. And this is not a review of either camera. I do have a full review of the Q2 already, and I have a decently in-depth hands-on preview of the X100V, though we're also working on a more in-depth review of this guy. And I'll link to all those things in the description. But for now, let's discuss how Raymond and I felt about these two cameras for nature and landscape photography.
A couple more links you'll see in the description is to this week's Member Monday, which is a behind-the-scenes look at my review process of the Tamron 28 to 200 mm f2.8 to 5.6 Di3RXD lens for Sony E-mount. Members see things like this behind-the-scenes video, my long-form courses, and free ebook download codes. There's a link to learn more about channel membership in the description as well. Now, back to round 2.
I'm going to discuss the Q2 first. Today I will discuss 5 things that hit me while I was kind of going back and forth between the two cameras. Let's start with the end. The Q2 has more conservative results for JPEG images. That has a couple of implications. One, I can't see how punchy I'm going to be able to make the image in the electronic viewfinder, even when I use the vivid film style and I push the saturation up as high as it will go in that film style. Once you have some experience with the camera, that concern kind of goes away because I'm able to push the colors a lot further in post-processing. So if I want super saturated flowers or landscapes, I can achieve it. However, I have many viewers who prefer to shoot JPEG, get the image right in the camera, and not edit at all. So the Leica being more conservative could definitely be a concern for you if you plan to do a lot of nature and landscape work and you want those very punchy colors. Let me be clear though, Leica designs their cameras to capture life and the world around you in that more realistic way. So I do like the option, at least, to punch it up to cartoon level if I want in post-processing. Here's a thought. The Q2 has a 28 mm lens affixed. Is that wide enough? It is for me. I do enjoy ultra wide from time to time, or 24 millimeters, but 28 is just fine. And incidentally, the Q2 has a feature called digital zoom where you can jump in to 35, 50, or 75 millimeters. And because the sensor contains 47 megapixels, you can do those jumps to zoom into a flower or whatever with no worries. Another cool thing about this lens is that it has macro capabilities. You just twist a ring on the lens and you can get in close to your subject. I like that for nature, and the Fuji does not have that capability. All right, let's talk about overall usability. Both of these cameras are easy to use, and in round 1 of this project, Raymond and I each discussed how we enjoy the tactile controls, but there are 2 things that I miss on the Q2 as I go back and forth between the two cameras. One is that the Q2 lacks a flip-out screen, so low-angle shots are more difficult. And 2, the Q2 lacks USB charging. Now, I did purchase a USB charger for the Q2's battery, but when I am on an all-day hike, it's easier to plug the X100V into a power bank than it is to dig out the charger and plug it into the USB charger. Okay, on to Raymond's thoughts on the X100V.
Last time I was all about the Q2. I've got to put it aside today, not too far out of reach, to talk about the X100V and my experience with it during a more landscape and nature-focused photography. You know, what do you have here? You have the fixed focal length lens. Leigh will talk a little bit about the adapter lens and the circumstances that she enjoys for that. We do have the weatherproofing accessories that we've attached to it. If it looks a little bit different, that's why. That brings it on par with the weatherproofing of the Q2. You've got f2 on the lens, and unlike the X100F, you have a sharp f2 on the lens. You had to think an extra moment or two with the X100F when you were opening up to f2 to see if it was a situation where the sharpness or the sharpness that it didn't have at f2 was going to be okay for the image. The X100V, you really don't need to think about that. From our experience, it's a much better lens overall. From a landscape perspective, that helps me or prevents me from having to think twice when it's a sunrise or a twilight situation where I'm shooting handheld, which I often am. I can open up to f2 without any particular concern about it. There's two things that I like about the viewfinder. Number one, with the electronic viewfinder, you're one menu option and one button on the back of the camera away from having a completely unobstructed view through the electronic viewfinder. Only when you have press will it show you the focus area, which is cool because I want confirmation of that. I don't want to use an automatic focus area, but when I'm composing, you can literally have an unobstructed view on the electronic viewfinder with very easy configuration, which I like a lot, a lot. And then also you've got the optical viewfinder capability. I haven't used that as much, but I like that Fuji's held onto that in this new mirrorless world where electronic viewfinders are becoming the norm. You still do have the optical viewfinder option. Now, why do I like both of those? Unobstructed, optical. Again, when it comes to landscape photography, I don't want to feel like I'm removed from the scene. There's a time and a place for that when I'm doing something very technical. But if I'm at the Grand Canyon or another great park, I don't want to feel like I was behind the camera all day, even if I was spending a lot of time with the camera. So those unobstructed viewfinder views are really going to help me be in the environment, even when I'm using this wonderful piece of electronics in the environment. The X100V is true to the X100 series with the buttons and dials. It's a very tactile experience. It's a camera to pick up to take and capture great images, but it's a camera to pick up to enjoy the process as well. And as usual, Fujifilm certainly delivers on that. There are a couple of items that are first to the series. It's a touchscreen on the back, touchscreen capability, and then the rear screen also flips out. I would not miss the touchscreen or its ability to flip out. I want the screen, don't get me wrong, but those aren't necessities for me in a camera like this. Leigh feels a little bit differently. She leans on those options a little bit more, especially the screen flipping out. I don't know how she feels about the touch screen, but I wouldn't miss them. I'm shooting this camera primarily in aperture priority, so I'm moving the aperture dial on the lens, but I'm really not doing much else. I'm not thinking about ridiculously high shutter speeds because I'm not shooting action with it. I'm walking around, I'm observing nature, I'm capturing nature and landscapes with it, and I'm moving that one dial under the lens most of the time, and I've got the camera autofocusing as well. That's how I like it. You can really get into this camera when you want to, when there's a time and a place for that, and when you want to keep it simple with something like aperture priority, there's really not much you need to touch besides the aperture ring and the shutter button. To wrap my thoughts on the X100V for this landscape and nature topic, it's a smooth operator just like this series always has been. Like they have with the whole series, Fuji has really made it an engaging experience to use this camera. They've done that with their interchangeable lens cameras as well. This isn't their first rodeo, and it's there, it's real, it delivers. Next video, I'll talk a little more about the Q2 and my experience with both of them, but for right now, I'm gonna leave it right here and say, yes, I could pick up the X100V in any number of circumstances and be perfectly happy using it.
I have one thing to add about the X100V. I used both the native lens, which is an effective field of view of 35 millimeters, and I also used our wide angle conversion lens, which screws onto the end and gives me an effective field of view of 28 millimeters, which is the same as the Q2. I realize that not everyone will own the conversion lens, but it is available. And in fact, there is a telephoto conversion lens, which gets you to an effective field of view of 50 millimeters. But the wide angle conversion lens is applicable to someone who will want to use their X100V for landscapes. So I did both. I used the 35mm sometimes, and I used the 28mm sometimes. The conversion lens does add a bit of bulk to the lens, but it's still such a small setup. It just isn't a big deal to me to drop that conversion lens into a little lens bag and bring it along. That being said, there is something elegant about the Q2 being all-in-one. No swapping lenses, which, you know, is kind of the entire idea of a fixed lens camera. But I could go back and forth on this topic, so I'm just going to stop there. I'm sure we will discuss it again in the finale. So, the finale of this comparison is coming soon. We have at least a couple more outings to do with the cameras, but remember one thing. We purchased both of these cameras after using both of them because we couldn't decide between the two, and there are two of us. Neither camera is inherently better than the other, is my point. They're both wonderful, but depending on your preferences, you may want one over the other. That's what this series of videos is aiming to answer. All right, everyone, please give this video a like if you enjoyed learning about our process for comparing these two cameras today, or if it helped you make your choice at all. And subscribe to the channel. You can even hit the bell button to be notified every time I share a new video. Remember, there are also links in the description for you to check out. And that's it, everybody. Thanks for watching.